Welcome, everyone. This is our regularly scheduled committee meeting for intergovernmental relations. Today's date is Thursday, August 10th. My name is Alondra Cano, and I will be chairing the committee today. Councilmember Glidden has some personal family matters that she's tending to today. And with us today are Councilmembers Abdi Warsame, Councilmember Jacob Fry, and Councilmember Barbara Johnson. Today we have two items on our agenda. One is a presentation by the City Coordinator's Office on our Welcoming City Task Force updates. We do have a resolution to pass or review and approve at that moment. And then item number 2 is our Intergovernmental Relations Department will give us a federal legislative update for 2017. So if we could please get started with our City Coordinator's presentation.
Thank you very much. Chair Cano, council members. My name is Greta Bergstrom. I'm the director of the city's communications department. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon as a representative and member of the city's Welcoming City Task Force to provide an update to the committee. This update will include the task force work plan and activities to date, the WeAre Minneapolis public awareness campaign update, and a Welcoming City resolution, as you referenced. Additionally, 4 members of the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board are here with us today to present their statement of welcoming, and I will introduce them at the conclusion of my portion of the presentation. So in February, Council directed staff to establish a task force to meet and develop strategies to strengthen city-level policies and programs and resources to better protect and defend our immigrant and refugee families. Staff were also directed to work with community partners to maximize the effectiveness of our programs and policies. The Welcoming City Task Force, which I am a member of, the Communications Department, we have monthly meetings of the full task force. We also have bi-weekly meetings of subcommittees, and those do include the Communications Subcommittee and Human Resource teams. The committee is comprised of the City Attorney's Office, Finance, Communications, Department of Civil Rights, Health Department, Intergovernmental Relations, Police Department, City Coordinator's Office, Neighborhood and Community Relations, 311, and Human Resources. The Welcoming City network are cities across the nation who are guided by principles of inclusion and creating communities that prosper because everybody in the city feels welcome. Our city, the city of Minneapolis, joined the Welcoming America cohort on May 12th, 2017. So we are a member. Enterprise activities do include to date holding a series of trauma trainings, and that is in conjunction and collaboration with Recast Minneapolis, which helps city employees understand trauma, how city employees may be viewed by residents experiencing trauma, and how to deal with vicarious trauma in communities. So this is a resource for our internal city staff. We are also collaborating with labor partners to provide support for employees and to ensure that they understand their role. We're collaborating with our national counterparts to align our efforts in Minneapolis and have joined in amicus briefs where and when appropriate. We've also created guides for employees and managers within the city on how to support their employees, how to support their families who may be dealing with immigration-related issues. So that's some of the ongoing work internally. In terms of the citywide activities, we have convened meetings with community partners, working with immigrant and refugee committees across the city to identify gaps and align efforts, provide funding for legal advocates working directly with our residents involving various immigration proceedings. We have also monitored bias and hate crimes, providing the hotline that we have here at the city as a community resource. We've developed web content to serve as a central hub on the city's site as a resource tool and hub. And we've developed messaging to promote city values to the community. We will be a part as a city of Welcoming Week. And Welcoming Week will be held September 15th through the 24th. And that's really, we are one of the member of the cohort, and across the nation during Welcoming Week, cities everywhere are kind of holding a series of events that are tailored to the needs and interests of the cities themselves, the jurisdictions. The idea of this is really to bring together immigrants and refugees, native-born residents, to make sure that everybody feels welcome and included and that there's a shared sense of values within the city. Um, we are working right now in partnership with different organizations, and we will be able to share more details of Welcoming Week as that moves forward. Those details are not fully set yet, and we're working in collaboration across the city and with partners.
We
That will-
have one question from Councilmember Jacob
Sure.
Fry, and before he speaks, I just wanted to acknowledge that Councilmember
Sure.
Andrew Johnson has joined us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Bergstrom, in the previous slide, you mentioned that we are providing funding for legal services for immigration services. I think that's awesome. Do you know how much we're providing and what specifically we're doing?
Yeah, I can speak to the first portion of that question. My understanding is there was $25,000 of funding provided to 3 different organizations,
Okay.
which includes the Immigrant Law Center,
Yep.
Advocates for Human Rights, and the Volunteer Lawyers Network.
Oh, feeling it, yep.
I can definitely find the answer out, or
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's wonderful. I would even be a proponent of increasing that funding as well, but thank you.
and that resource, as I mentioned, is on the WeAre Minneapolis portion of the city website as well,
Great.
as a place for people to check out. Which brings us to the We Are Minneapolis campaign. The We Are Minneapolis campaign, so it's a hashtag, We Are Minneapolis, and so it's intended obviously as a social media campaign, but a broader public awareness campaign that is still in development. The campaign will promote city's efforts to ensure that Minneapolis is indeed a welcoming city for all people, and we are expecting a September launch that will coincide with Welcoming Week, so mid-September is the plan. The idea is really to lift up kind of the rich diversity of residents through photography and narrative, including audio and content online, highlighting kind of authentic stories and lifting up the narratives of people's lived experiences. It could be refugee members, immigrants, individuals from the community who have lived here for generations. So it's very inclusive and trying to really unite people to understand a little bit about each other and why they're here and how they identify with the city. The idea is to help drive community to a resource hub. So both in terms of promoting this visually and on the website and through social media, we want to make sure that our community members are aware of the resource hub on the city's site, and that just includes some promotional need to make them aware of that. Campaign elements right now that are in consideration include social media, posters that could be used both within city buildings as well as out in neighborhoods, earned media, and then internal communications as well to support our city staff here. And we also, council will be considering, as you mentioned, Chircano, a welcoming city resolution that will be reaffirming the city's commitment to all residents as a welcoming, inclusive environment for all, regardless of race, gender, religious affiliation. And now I would like to welcome the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board members. There are 4 members here today, but my understanding is Heidi and Sharon are going to come up and read a welcoming statement.
Hi, my name is Heidi Sanchez. I am going to be a junior at Hiawatha Collegiate High School. I have been a part of Minneapolis Youth Congress for 2 years. I am part of the safety committee. And 3 things I'm passionate about are LGBTQI rights, getting my voice heard by youth and getting my expressions out, and my creative writing and reading. Something that I bring to the table that an adult may not is I like to incorporate other people's opinions or ideas into mine and get everyone's ideas.
My name is Sharon Record. I will be a senior this fall at Edison High School. I'm a part of the Green Committee with the Minneapolis Youth Congress. And 3 things that I'm passionate about is LGBTQ rights, mental health awareness, and youth engagement. One thing that I bring to the table that adults may not is my ability to speak out when others cannot. And I am here with Heidi to speak the statement of welcoming on behalf of the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board. The Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board, the Minneapolis Youth Congress, and our jurisdictional partners, the City of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, Minneapolis Public Schools, and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board work together to welcome all young people and their families. Our institutions serve all people through programs, activities, and services without fear of reprisal for their immigration or refugee status. We find the new executive order about immigrants and refugees to be paralyzing. Even though the executive orders have been halted through judicial action, the effects of these policies and the threat of new executive orders are damaging. They are tearing families apart, instilling fear in children, schools, businesses, and communities. The ripple effect of these policies has a significant impact on our children, leaving them afraid and isolated. It is extremely harmful as it limits their access to public services and trivializes their humanity.
We, as advocates and supporters of our children and young people, are dedicated to the healthy development and well-being of all communities in Minneapolis. This is a vibrant and resource-abundant city, a safe place for refugees and other vulnerable people coming from war-torn, oppressive, and dangerous countries. By doing what we can to help others in need, we enrich our own communities and make this a better place to live. All human beings are a great treasure which we cannot abandon or demean. In these times, let us look out for one another and make sure all our children and their families feel welcome and safe in Minneapolis. We provide support for the marginalized and affirm the existence of all people, adults, youth, those with and without families, those of all gender identities and sexual orientation, regardless of religious belief, race, ethnicity, abilities, or socioeconomic status.
Together
Better,
is not just a saying for us.
it is an action. MYC created this statement of welcome for the diverse populations in Minneapolis, and we hope you support us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Cano, council members, I can stand for any questions that you might have.
Sure. Do we have any questions from our committee members? I just wanted to say that I'm really thankful to have the young people in the room today. You might know already that young people have been the drivers of the DREAM Act movement nationally, which has staged a lot of civic engagement opportunities nationally to essentially create what we now know the program known as DACA, which has provided deferred action for the lives of thousands and thousands of young people throughout the country to be able to work and stay here. So it's really important and valuable to have your voices here and to continue to drive this work. Yesterday I had a meeting, actually 2 days ago I had a meeting with city staff and one of the advocacy groups, and we discussed how the federal budget will soon be passed, and then we will start seeing more of the mandates, the federal mandates that will start to become rolled out into our communities. And so really looking at what gets funded this year federally and anticipating what the impact will be in our communities for the next year. So I think the work of this task force, given that legislative timeline around resources and federal directives, will become much more important. Because that's when we'll have to respond to the changing field. So right now, I haven't heard of massive raids or deportations. We know that it's happening here and there. Early on, we heard from some of our suburban cities and our partners there that things were happening against the immigrant community. But I think some of us expect much more movement next year after the budget is resourcing some of the things that we've heard about that will impact our immigrant and refugee families. So I think that the work of this task force is really important, and it's really good to see you all digging deep to figure out how to expand the base of knowledge around this effort, engage more folks, raise awareness, raise education, bring partners to the table. So thank you for leading this. So without further questions, we will go ahead and I will go ahead and move this forward. So this is the receiving and filing of our Welcoming City Task Force update, as well as the passage of a resolution affirming the city of Minneapolis as a welcoming city. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you.
Thank you very
Motion
much.
passes. And now we will move on to our second item, which is a 2017 federal legislative session update from our Intergovernmental Relations Department staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Gene Ranieri. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the city. This will be a brief update of where Congress is now on the federal budget and some other issues. And it's very difficult to predict because not much has happened to date. The first slide Well, Congress is in recess. They'll be back on the 5th of September. And this recess is traditional. It's been going on for many, many years, where they take the whole month of August to be in their districts to work with their constituents. So there have been a lot of community meetings all over the country, and many folks are hearing a lot about healthcare, immigration, and other budget items, particularly tax reform. The fiscal year begins October 1st. So when they come back on September 5th, they only have about 25 days to try and put together an appropriations bill or bills that would carry for FY18. In addition to that, they also have a debt ceiling adjustment to make, and that's rather critical for Congress. So where are we now? Well, usually there's a budget resolution adopted by both the House and the Senate concurrently. It's a concurrent resolution. Well, that hasn't happened. The House passed a resolution, and in that resolution, they also have many items dealing with things like federal funding for immigration, things of that nature. Also, Medicare and Medicaid, which we heard about a lot in the healthcare debate just recently, but at least the House resolution included some reductions to Medicare and Medicaid. The Senate has not taken up that resolution. It is doubtful if they will. So what will happen? Well, there's two types of funding: discretionary funding, which is that funding that requires Congress to pass an appropriation. Then there's the mandated spending like Medicare and Medicaid, which has been approved by Congress and sort of like an open and standing appropriation, and there isn't an annual appropriation. So to change those, they'd have to change the statutes themselves. And that's been some of the attempts that have been tried. And I know our state government is very concerned about the proposals for Medicaid and Medicare. So without a resolution, the Congress has actually begun to look at the budgets and appropriations to put together bills. The House is way ahead of the Senate. They have 12 standing subcommittees. 11 of them have approved bills, but none of them have gone independently to the floor. The Senate Appropriation has approved 2 subcommittee bills, and the House passed just before they went home what is called a mini-bus, where they put together the defense bill, the water, energy, veterans, and legislative branch, pass it and send it to the Senate. They need 60 votes in the Senate to pass it, and the leading Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee or Appropriations Committee, Senator Leahy from Vermont, said, we're not going to do that. So what are some of the highlights or factors in the appropriations process we've seen so far? Well, the House and Senate are generally above the president's appropriations. In some cases, he actually recommended no funding. He also recommended funding based on certain conditions. His budget eliminated funding for CDBG, home, and Tiger. The House and Senate recommends now funding for those two, CDBG and home, and also the Senate continues Tiger. Now, when they started the process, the House and the Senate appropriators used the FY17 budget as a base. So sometimes they went above that, sometimes they went below it. This chart shows what happened is being proposed in the House bill, a community development block grant. You have the FY17 budget of $3 billion. The House subcommittee is at 2.9 or $100 million less. The Senate's right at $3 billion. And that's what happened last year, and they agreed on $3 billion. The blank is the president's recommendation of no funding at all for CDBG. Similar pattern for home, where you see a FY appropriation of $950 million. The Senate's right on. The House is at $850, and the president recommended no funding. HOPWA, pretty close, $356 from last year. The House is that same number, and the Senate and the president are $330. In terms of Tiger, no funding in the House and in the Senate, $550 million, about $50 million above what was last year. So what's going to happen? I hate to prognosticate, but there are some options. One option could be small bills put together like transportation and HUD and maybe justice. There could be a continuing resolution, which we have seen for the last couple of years, where Congress would approve for a certain period of time, maybe to the end of this fiscal calendar year, or for 90 days, funding for all the federal agencies, or there could be a continuing resolution and continued work on the appropriations. However, by late September, we should know more, and we will keep watching it. There's also, in addition to these issues, there's also other policy issues, the whole issue of immigration. There have been several bills introduced. One bill would more restrictions. It would put more money into the Department of Homeland Security for enforcement. It would also, if a city is considered to violate certain federal criteria, with one being working with ICE on detention of people who may not have immigration status, and also on the detainers, they would lose their community development block grant funding. We don't have a jail, so I'm not sure it would impact us. The other issue is tax reform. It's how to pay for that. There has been a lot of discussion that the next thing that Congress wants to tackle is tax reform, but the last time it was done 30 years ago, it took about a year to do it. Infrastructure has been proposed by the president, but there's been no action at all in the House and the Senate. The debt ceiling, I think the Treasury Secretary suggested that it needs to be done before the end of September. Federal Aviation Administration, that bill is to be reauthorized, and that's due September 30th, but it can be extended. And then healthcare, but there's a bipartisan group working on that. So, Madam Chair and committee members, there's a lot of loose ends, a lot of unknowns, but I think one thing is at least the House and the Senate at this point is not buying into some of the president's recommendations to defund several programs that impact us. So I'll stop and stand for any questions.
Sure. Looking around to see if we have any questions from our committee members, and we have Councilmember Barbara Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Ranieri and I, we all follow what Congress does in the newspapers, so it's helpful to see the analysis here. But one thing you do hear is that there's a lot of stuff going on administratively, and that is more hard to decipher from what gets reported. So what are your thoughts about that, and have there been any kind of significant changes that have resulted from administrative changes?
Madam Chair, Council President Johnson, thanks for the question. There's been a lot of administrative executive orders by the president. Some of those early on have been challenged and made their way to the Supreme Court. One of the ones most frequent we're seeing are particularly in the area of border security, criminal justice, immigration. Mr. Sessions has been coming out with some orders or criteria for funding for the Byrne Grant, suggesting that to receive funding for the Byrne Grant, the recipient, I think in our case, the recipient there is Hennepin County. They would need to certify that they do not, that they share information with ICE. They let them know when they have someone detained, and they would hold someone for 48 hours. That whole thing has been challenged by the city of Chicago, and other cities have joined in on that case, saying that violates certain segments, and I'll have to defer to the city attorney, of the Constitution.
Madam Chair and Mr. Ranieri, that's correct. The city of Chicago has filed suit, particularly the 48-hour detention provision. There are a number of federal court cases, as well as I think very recently, the state of Massachusetts Supreme Court, our federal district court here in the District of Minnesota have said it violates the due process clause to hold anyone longer than otherwise required because of the criminal charges. So just a request by immigration control and enforcement to hold somebody for 48 hours, it would not be constitutional if that meant holding someone longer than the jail would otherwise hold them due to, if it was a criminal warrant for arrest or an arrest by law enforcement.
Other administrative actions has been in the area of refugees and immigration, like refugees, definitions of who could be allowed into the country, the whole definition of family that was finally settled, or at least almost settled. There's also been other issues about how many folks can be given certain types of visas, all been done administratively. In the area of housing and HUD, we have not seen as many administrative orders at all in that whole area.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I want to thank you for your presentation, and
Thank you very much, Madam
thank you for your
Chair.
advocacy.
On August 24th, which is our next committee meeting,
Mhm.
Congressman Ellison has agreed to come and talk to us
Wonderful.
about what he sees what's happening in Congress.
Great. Okay, thank you. Without further business on our agenda, this was a receive and file, so we can just go ahead and vote on that. And all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.